Good morning, everybody, and I apologize for the delays. We've been having some extra issues with setting up our Spanish translation, but looks like we're ready to go now. And thank you all for joining us. We're going to do a couple of quick slides here to make sure that everybody who wants to view this workshop in Spanish can do so, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Everyone, and welcome. We are providing simultaneous Spanish interpretation services for today's meeting. Our two interpreters today are Giselle and Jeanette. There seems to have been an update to the Zoom interpretation feature, so I will give the old instructions first, though it may be different. Please select the language you would like to hear the meeting in by selecting the interpretation channel by clicking on the globe icon in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. Please choose English or Spanish and mute original audio. It is important to select either English or Spanish because you may miss important information if you are not in a specified language channel. In the recent update, you may have been prompted to select a language when you first joined the meeting. If you are listening in the wrong language channel and you do not see the interpretation icon, please sign out of Zoom and sign back in and select the appropriate language channel. And I'll pause here for our interpreter.
Buenos días a todos. Tenemos la reunión del día de hoy disponible en el idioma español. Para seleccionar su idioma, si está usando un dispositivo móvil, por favor toque su pantalla, seleccione los 3 puntos en la parte inferior, luego seleccione idioma de interpretación, seleccione español, luego seleccione silenciar el audio original y para finalizar su opción, por favor seleccione finalizar. Si está utilizando una computadora, pero un globo ubicado en la parte inferior de su pantalla, por favor haga clic en el globo terráqueo, seleccione español, luego seleccione silenciar el audio original y listo. Probablemente han habido una nueva versión o actualización del Zoom, así es que asegúrense de tener esta nueva versión para poder tener todas estas nuevas opciones disponibles para usted en el canal español. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. The PowerPoint presentation is also available in English and Spanish. You can click on View Options at the top of your screen. Select Stacy Gillespie to see the presentation in English, or select Presentation on Español to see the presentation in Spanish. More recent versions of Zoom display these options as tabs on the top of your screen, so you might see these options displayed side by side. I'll pause here for Giselle.
Muchas gracias. Como hemos mencionado, esta presentación está disponible tanto en español como en inglés. Es que para que ustedes puedan seleccionar la presentación en español mientras se está presentando en inglés, por favor haga clic en View Options en la parte superior de su pantalla y seleccione presentación en español o Presentation in English, si ese es el caso. Como pueden ver en la imagen, está dándole unas guías de paso a paso de cómo poder seleccionar de esta presentación en español y en inglés. Back to you.
Thanks, Giselle. At this time, everyone should be in their specified language channel. So Giselle will be moving to the Spanish interpretation channel and we'll start our simultaneous interpretation.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen and Giselle. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Phil Wiles, and I am an Assistant Chief Counsel for the State Water Resources Control Board. I just want to give a brief introduction this morning before I hand the presentation over to Stacy Gillespie, who is also an attorney with the State Water Board. Stacy's presentation is intended to provide a general overview of our water quality petition process for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, and then a more detailed overview of the draft dairy order that was released on October 1st, 2024. After Stacy's presentation, I will do my best to provide answers to questions that are emailed to us, questions that are seeking clarification of what the draft dairy order says. And we acknowledge that the draft dairy order is fairly complicated. The point of today's staff workshop is to not just give an overview of the order, but also provide an opportunity for you to ask questions about the contents of the draft dairy order. Addressing your questions, we hope, might help you with developing your comments by providing you with a improved understanding of what the draft dairy order says, just to help you formulate your written comments on the draft dairy order. Those comments are due in writing by December 6th at noon. So I want to emphasize that today is not the opportunity to comment on the draft dairy order. So I will not be attempting to answer questions about why the draft dairy order says what it says, or comments or disagreements or opinions that are framed as questions. If you do have questions about what the draft dairy order says during today's workshop, please email those questions to waterqualitypetitions@waterboards.ca.gov. And let me give you that email address again. It's waterqualitypetitions@waterboards.ca.gov. And that email address will be on one of Stacy's slides in a couple of minutes if you didn't catch that. I will be monitoring that email address during today's workshop. And after Stacy's presentation, again, I will do my best to answer the questions that are asking for some clarification about what the draft dairy order says. Presenters during the, Stacy and I will be doing our best to speak slowly to accommodate our Spanish interpreters. There will also be a short break about halfway through Stacy's presentation, and then a short break afterwards before I begin to address questions that have been submitted by email. And just a note, we have not conducted a staff workshop like this for our water quality petitions in the past, and most of us are also very new with the mechanics with live Spanish interpretation. So please be patient with us if we experience any technical difficulties. With that, I want to welcome you again and thank you for attending the workshop. And now I will turn it over to Stacy.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to provide an overview of the State Water Board's draft dairy order. Here's an outline of the topics I'll be discussing. I'll be moving through the slides somewhat slowly to make sure I give enough time to our interpreters to translate live as I go. So I'll begin by describing the purpose of today's workshop with items 2 through 4. I'll provide some context about why we are here today, including an overview of the petition process and the Central Valley Water Board's dairy general waste discharge requirements that the petition at issue here sought the State Water Board to review. After that, with item 5, I'll explain the key actions the State Water Board has taken to date. Then I'll be spending most of today's discussion on items 6 through 8, which are the significant components of the draft dairy order, including item 7, the issues raised in the petition, and item 8, the new regulatory framework the draft dairy order proposes the Central Valley Water Board implement in revised general WDRs on remand. With item 9, I'll explain the anticipated timeline and opportunities for public input on the draft dairy order. I'll conclude by identifying actions by the State Water Board and the Central Valley Water Board that will come after the State Water Board adopts the final dairy order. The purpose of today's workshop is to provide an overview of the draft dairy order that we distributed recently on October 1st, and its two major components: the issues raised on petition and the new framework to regulate dairy discharges to groundwater. To reiterate what Phil touched on already, after my presentation, we will open it up to address clarifying questions about the contents of the draft order. The slide shows where you can email your questions during my presentation. Send to waterqualitypetitions@waterboards.ca.gov. Again, I'll underscore that today we will not be responding to any recommendations or disagreements you might have with the draft order, even if they are presented in the form of a question. So again, we will only be taking clarifying questions today. Also, for those of you who do have input or suggested changes to the draft order that you would like the State Water Board to consider, we encourage you to submit your written comments, which are due by December 6th. We will also be providing additional opportunities for oral comments, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So here I provide an overview of the petition process to provide some context for why we are here today, particularly for any of you who may be unfamiliar with the petition process. Water Code Section 13320 allows anyone to challenge a regional water board decision they disagree with by petitioning the State Water Board, asking it to review the regional water board's decision. For example, when a regional water board issues waste discharge requirements, referred to as WDRs, that decision can be petitioned for State Water Board review. Petitioning WDRs is the case in this matter. Next, when a water board is issuing or reviewing WDRs, the boards are acting in what's called a judicial function. This means, whoops, sorry about that. This means the board is acting in a role similar to a judge, deciding the case based on the facts in the record and the arguments presented by the parties. In this role, the board members are not allowed to have private conversations called ex parte communications with anyone interested in the case. This is a way to keep things transparent and fair. However, there is an important exception to this prohibition that applies to general WDRs, which are those WDRs that apply to a group of dischargers and don't name specific dischargers. For general WDRs, private or ex parte conversations are allowed with board members, but they must be publicly disclosed and posted on the State Water Board's website. I mention this because in this case, we've had some ex parte conversations, which I'll go over in a few minutes. So back to some petition rules. When someone files a petition, they need to explain why the Regional Water Board's action was improper. The State Water Board has 90 days to decide whether to accept or dismiss a petition. If the petition is accepted, the State Water Board must issue a decision within 270 days. However, the State Water Board may also review a Regional Water Board action on its own, which we refer to as the State Water Board's own motion review, in which case there's no deadline for the State Water Board to make a decision. Both are the case here. the State Water Board decided to take up a petition and decided to address other issues on its own motion. Lastly, on the State Water Board's review, the State Water Board has absolute discretion as to which issues it will address. If the State Water Board doesn't address any issues raised in the petition, they are deemed to be dismissed. Next is an overview of the Dairy General WDRs the Central Valley Water Board adopted in 2013, which is the subject of the draft dairy order. In terms of its scope, about 1,300 dairies in the Central Valley are covered. It has requirements for 4 waste sources that impact groundwater. Production areas where the cows are milked, existing waste retention ponds where dairy waste is stored on the farms, new or reconstructed waste retention ponds, and land application areas where manure is spread as fertilizer across croplands. An important point to note is that when the general WDRs were issued, the source of waste that was presumed to be by far the largest contributor of nitrates to groundwater pollution was from existing earthen ponds, which isn't the case any longer, which we will discuss. Last, the WDRs include a groundwater limitation that prohibits dairy waste discharges from causing an exceedance of water quality objectives. The draft dairy order's main focus is the drinking water standard for nitrates, which is 10 milligrams per liter. The Dairy General WDRs.
Sorry, Stacy, if I can interrupt for just a moment. I've been getting a couple of messages from people who are either seeing the presentation in Spanish or in a couple of cases not seeing the presentation at all. And I think this is also a function of Zoom's update. If you're seeing the presentation in Spanish, go to the top of your screen and select Stacy Gillespie SWRCB's screen, and go ahead and email water quality petitions at waterboards.ca.gov if that doesn't solve the problem for you. Thank you, and sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Phil. Just pause a moment. Okay, so to continue the overview of the Dairy General WDRs, they also require immediate compliance with the groundwater limitation. However, immediate compliance is not required if a dairy complies with the requirements of the WDR's time schedule, which is a total of 16 years, made up of 2 phases. Phase 1 is 6 years and requires dairies to conduct monitoring to identify any deficient management practices for the different sources of dairy waste that are impacting groundwater. Phase 2 is 10 years and uses the Phase 1 results for dairies to identify and implement any necessary improvements to meet the groundwater limitation. The general WDRs also have a time schedule extension that the Central Valley Water Board may use to extend any of the deadlines in the time schedule, including the final compliance deadline, if a dairy demonstrates that it is technically or economically infeasible to meet the deadline. Last, representatives of the dairy industry administer the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program, which I'll refer to as the CVDRMP. Over 98% of the dairies participate in it, and under the general WDRs, the CVDRMP is responsible for the Phase 1 monitoring and reporting requirements and identifying improvements to deficient management practices to be implemented in Phase 2. And that's in lieu of each dairy doing so on its own. The petition at issue here was filed by petitioners Agua and Elf in 2013. Petitioners requested the State Water Board to review its objections to the Central Valley Water Board's Dairy General WDRs. At a very high level, the issues raised in the petition are that the Central Valley Water Board's Dairy General WDRs failed to comply with the requirements of the State Water Board's anti-degradation policy, the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act, and the state's human right to water and anti-discrimination laws. Regarding the petition timeline, after being filed in 2013, it was in different stages of being in abeyance or active until 2017, when it was then deemed complete. Then in 2018, the Central Valley Water Board submitted the administrative record for the general WDRs, and responses to the petition were filed by the Central Valley Water Board, as well as by Dairy Cares and the California Farm Bureau. Next are some key actions by the State Water Board and State Water Board staff related to the draft order since the petition was filed. First, after the petition was deemed complete, the State Water Board adopted an own motion review order in 2018 that would allow it more time to issue an order beyond the 270-day regulatory deadline. That additional time allowed for other relevant actions to occur that would help inform our development of the draft dairy order. Second, staff reviewed the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program's summary report it submitted in 2019, along with other scientific literature. The report was submitted at the conclusion of Phase 1. Couple things to note is that it describes a shift in understanding of nitrogen loading to groundwater. While the underlying dairy WDRs presumed that seepage from the ponds was the largest contributor, the report concludes that dairy's land application accounts for the overwhelming source of nitrogen loading, 94% relative to discharges from ponds and production areas. The report also recommends a shift in the compliance strategy. While the report does include some recommended implementation measures, they are not sufficient to actually achieve compliance with the WDR's groundwater limitation within 10 years, as required by the time schedule. Instead, the report recommends shifting the final compliance schedule to align with the Central Valley Water Board's Salt and Nitrate Control Program, referred to as the CV Salts Program, which number 3 notes the State Water Board initially approved the CV Salts program in 2019 and approved the revised program in 2021. Notably, the program uses a collaborative approach for nitrates control solution from all sources and includes requirements to provide replacement water to residents reliant on wells contaminated by nitrates. And it has a final compliance deadline of up to 35 years. Next, the State Water Board staff held a total of 14 ex parte meetings. The attendees included petitioners and representatives of the dairy industry, the Central Valley Water Board, California Department of Food and Agriculture, and environmental NGOs, and board member McGuire attended each of these meetings. These meetings allowed State Water Board staff to receive constructive feedback on its initial technical recommendations from the expertise of the attendees. Disclosures of these meetings were posted online as required by the ex parte exception for general WDRs. And the disclosures of these meetings are described in footnote 101 of the draft order. Next, we added documents to the administrative record. Normally, when the State Water Board makes a decision on a petition, it is based on the administrative record submitted by the Regional Water Board. Here, however, as I've mentioned, additional actions and information help to inform the contents of the draft dairy order. So these documents have been added to the record that was submitted by the Central Valley Water Board. Footnote 53 of the draft order identifies the documents we added to the record, and it also identifies documents that are already in the Regional Board's record because they are cited to in the draft order, and we wanted to provide easy access to them. These are also all posted online at the petition webpage. Finally, we distributed the draft order to the public on October 1st. I'll mention here that the draft order represents recommendations by State Water Board staff. As we receive your written and oral comments on it, we anticipate that the draft order will be revised 1 or more times before it is finally adopted. Now that I've covered the context for the draft dairy order, I want to provide a high-level overview of its key features so I can set the stage for the details that will follow. First, it addresses 6 issues raised in the petition. Second, the draft order establishes a new framework to regulate dairy discharges to groundwater. Its overarching goal is to ensure dairies comply with the nitrate drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter for nitrates, what is called the nitrogen discharge limit in the draft order. It has new requirements for 3 key areas: dairies' land application practices and waste retention ponds, and providing alternative drinking water for affected residents. It applies to all dairies in the Central Valley region, but it also has precedential elements for all other regions in the state that have dairies that collect and land apply manure on their cropland. Last, the draft dairy order would remand the Dairy General WDRs to the Central Valley Water Board with direction to develop revised general WDRs for dairies consistent with the dairy order's directives. The first petition issue involves the length of the 16-year time schedule in the Dairy General WDRs to comply with the groundwater limitation. Petitioners claim that allowing dairies up to 16 years to stop exceeding the drinking water standard for nitrates is too long. The draft order concludes that the timeline is reasonable and aligns with the water code and non-point source policy, which allow time for discharges to meet water quality requirements, which here include the collection and evaluation of data in phase 1 and implementing upgraded management practices in phase 2. The second petition issue involves the Dairy General WDR's allowance of dairies to request an extension of the compliance deadlines, including the 16-year deadline, if a dairy can show it would be technically or economically infeasible to comply with the deadline. As written, the extension is open-ended with no clear limit on how long it could be. Petitioners claim the open-ended extension creates indefinite deadlines, which they argue is impermissible. They raise this issue in the context of the existing earthen ponds because at the time, ponds were assumed to be the main source of groundwater pollution, and the Central Valley Water Board ruled out liner requirements as being too costly for dairies. Petitioners were concerned that dairies could continue to claim economic infeasibility to delay compliance in perpetuity. Regarding the conclusion, the dairy order agrees with petitioners that the open-ended extension is inconsistent with the non-point source policy, which requires time schedules to be specific. Yet the conclusion is even broader than the context raised in the petition because it applies to time schedules for all sources of dairy discharges, not just as to ponds. It concludes that an indefinite extension available, coupled with a 16-year final deadline, is essentially no deadline at all. The dairy order provides that the next iteration of the general WDRs must set clear, specific timelines for final compliance. The third petition issue involves the Central Valley Water Board's application of the anti-degradation policy's maximum benefit analysis. The issue is that when a water board authorizes a lowering of water quality, the State Water Board's anti-degradation policy requires that discharges to high-quality waters maintain the highest water quality consistent with the maximum benefit to the people of the state. The maximum benefit analysis requires the water board to consider economic and social costs of the proposed discharge, and regarding economic costs to both the discharger and the affected public must be considered. Petitioners claim the Dairy General WDRs only consider costs to the dairy industry and omit consideration of costs to individuals, water providers, or the state to treat or replace contaminated water, as well as health impacts from drinking contaminated water. Here, the draft order agrees with petitioners that the Dairy General WDR's maximum benefit analysis is incomplete. It directs the Central Valley Water Board to ensure the analysis for the revised General WDRs addressed cost to the discharger and the affected public. The fourth petition issue also involves the anti-degradation policy. The issue here is that when authorizing a lowering of water quality, the anti-degradation policy requires that the discharges to high-quality waters will not result in water quality less than applicable water quality objectives. Petitioners claim that the time schedule in the general WDRs allows degradation of high-quality waters to fall below the water quality objective in groundwater, the 10 milligram per liter for nitrates, in violation of the anti-degradation policy. The draft order concludes that temporary degradation of high-quality waters is permissible. It finds that compliance with water quality objectives is governed by the Water Code and the non-point source policy, which authorize the water boards to grant time schedules that temporarily allow water quality to fall below objectives. Immediate compliance is not required. So even when discharges affect high-quality waters, the anti-degradation policy does not limit the water board's authority provided by the Water Code and the non-point source policy. With the fifth issue, petitioners claim the Central Valley Water Board failed to consider the human right to water statute when adopting the general WDRs. The draft order concludes that this claim lacks merit from a legal perspective because the human right to water statute, as outlined at Water Code section 106.3, does not apply to WDRs. The statute only applies to policies, regulations, and grants. Nonetheless, the draft order acknowledges that the State Water Board and the Central Valley Water Board have both adopted resolutions to consider the human right to water more broadly and sets forth the State Water Board's expectation that the right will be considered in future actions by each of the water boards consistent with their resolutions. The State Water Board's draft dairy order addresses this consideration on page 75. Petitioner's sixth claim is that the Dairy General WDRs violate California's anti-discrimination law by disproportionately harming low-income and Latino communities who rely on groundwater for drinking water. The draft order concludes that this claim lacks merit from a legal perspective. That is because low-income status is not protected by the state law, and while race and ethnicity are, there is no evidence in the record that shows that the Dairy General WDRs disproportionately impact Latinos reliant on groundwater as compared to other Central Valley residents also reliant on groundwater. Nonetheless, the draft order emphasizes the State Water Board's ongoing commitment to protect all residents who rely on groundwater. It also notes that the draft order's new regulatory framework aims to ensure dairies meet nitrate limits to improve groundwater quality for all residents over time. So now we'll take a short 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll dive into the new regulatory framework. And in case you've joined us late or didn't write it down, I want to give you the email address one more time that you may submit questions to. That's at waterqualitypetitions@waterboards.ca.gov. And we will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, I think we're ready to resume now. We now get to the draft dairy orders, new regulatory framework. And before diving into the specific implementation measures, I'll use the next couple of slides to show how the pieces fit together. First, with regard to its scope, the entire framework would apply to all dairies in the Central Valley region, including existing, later expanded or consolidated, and future dairies. In addition, as I noted, some of the implementation components of the framework are also precedential for dairies in other regions, but only for those that collect and land apply their dairy waste to their croplands. I'll highlight the precedential components as we go, but note here that most of them are the land application components and the requirements to provide replacement drinking water. Next, the regulatory framework focuses on 3 key areas: land application and waste retention ponds, and the requirement to provide alternative drinking water to affected residents. The framework has a combined total of 8 mandatory components for these 3 key areas. The framework's ultimate objective is to ensure dairies comply with the nitrogen discharge limit. The nitrogen discharge limit is also a mandatory component of the framework. It ensures dairies do not cause or contribute to an exceedance of the 10 milligrams per liter drinking water standard for nitrates in groundwater. It applies to discharges from land application, ponds, and production areas. And it is one of the precedential components of the framework. Next, one unique aspect of the framework, and one that may be confusing as you read the draft order, is that it provides 2 different types of guidance to the Central Valley Water Board on revising the general WDRs for implementing the 9 total mandatory components. It includes a mix of specified and recommended implementation requirements. For example, the framework specifies the implementation requirements for the nitrogen discharge limit, the whole farm accounting approach, and the requirements to provide alternative drinking water supplies. The Central Valley Water Board must include these implementation requirements in the revised general WDRs for dairies. But the framework also provides recommended implementation requirements for all remaining land application and pond components. The dairy order takes this approach for the recommended implementation requirements because some of them are conceptual and need to be developed. And we are not certain that there aren't better alternatives the Central Valley Water Board might identify for dairies to comply with the nitrogen discharge limit that may have less environmental or economic impacts. As a result, the draft order directs the Central Valley Water Board to treat the recommended implementation requirements as preferred options for implementing the corresponding mandatory components as it considers its revised general WDRs. So now let's dive into the first of the 3 key areas, the land application requirements. This slide describes the first land application component. final numeric land application rates that ensure that dairy's land application will ultimately comply with the nitrogen discharge limit. First, enforceable final numeric land application rates must be developed that correlate directly with the nitrogen discharge limit of 10 milligrams per liter. This component is precedential for other regions. The dairy order includes a two-part conceptual implementation proposal for the state Central Valley Water Board to consider for a dairy to implement the final numeric land application rates. The first is a groundwater loading limit, expressed as the amount of nitrogen that can reach below the root zone per acre of cropland, per acre foot of water to comply with the drinking water standard, along with a margin of safety. And because the development of the groundwater loading limit by itself doesn't result in direct compliance, the second part of the proposal is to use the groundwater loading limit to create a multi-year land application rate formula. The formula would tell dairy operators how much nitrogen can be applied per acre of cropland per year, per acre foot of water to comply with the nitrogen discharge limit. The formula would take into account the amount of nitrogen applied, crop uptake, denitrification, and other factors. Lastly, these two elements are conceptual because they are to be developed by the State Water Board in coordination with the Central Valley Water Board using a scientific peer review process. The State Water Board will develop these two elements after the State Water Board's adoption of the final dairy order. Once the State Water Board develops them, they will be provided to the Central Valley Water Board for it to consider including in the revised general WDRs. The framework also requires the Central Valley Water Board to establish time schedules for existing dairies to comply with the final numeric land application rates. This component is precedential for other regions. So for existing Central Valley dairies, the dairy order expects the time schedule would align with CV salts and be within a short as time as practicable, but not to exceed 35 years. This expectation recognizes the constraints on the dairy industry's ability to essentially do something else with the dairy waste rather than apply it to cropland. It would have to be treated or exported at a scale that today's technologies and markets aren't ready for. For new dairies, however, immediate compliance with the nitrogen discharge limit would be required. Next, the framework requires the Central Valley Water Board to establish interim numeric land application rates to reduce manure application until the final rates are met. This component is also precedential for other regions. The framework gives discretion to the Central Valley Water Board as to what the specific milestones and corresponding deadlines should be. Except the State Water Board recommends whole farm nitrogen balance be considered as one interim milestone. Generally speaking, whole farm nitrogen balance is achieved when a dairy land applies nitrogen as needed for agronomic rates and exports or treats any in excess of agronomic rates. With number 4, the framework requires a whole farm nitrogen accounting method to be established. This is another precedential component. This requirement borrows from the CVD RMP's summary report. An important distinction here is that whether or not the Central Valley Water Board includes achieving whole farm nitrogen balance as an interim milestone, as we recommend in number 3, the whole farm nitrogen accounting method must be used in the revised general WDRs as an accounting tool for dairies to track how much nitrogen the cows on the dairy generate and where it goes. We task the Central Valley Water Board with developing the whole farm nitrogen accounting approach in consultation with technical experts and stakeholders, with an independent peer review process to ensure scientific integrity. The draft order also includes additional technical elements identified in the CVD RMP's summary report that we recommend the Central Valley Water Board include in the revised general WDRs for short-term implementation to improve land application practices. I won't go into any detail of these measures, but I list them here to show that they are part of the draft order for the Central Valley Water Board to consider. But I will mention that the irrigation and nitrogen management plan reporting requirements at item 5F are precedential for other regions because those requirements help improve nitrogen management efficiency. So now we turn to the second key area of the regulatory framework, waste retention ponds. The framework has 3 mandatory components that correspond to the 3 categories of ponds that are identified in the draft order. These components apply only to the Central Valley Water Board. They are not precedential for other regions. Before getting to the first requirement, it's helpful to note that the framework has different implementation requirements for the 3 different categories of ponds. 2 of those categories distinguish between existing ponds that have hydraulic continuity to groundwater and existing ponds that do not have hydraulic continuity to groundwater. This is important because where ponds do have hydraulic continuity to groundwater, that means there's a connection between the waste and the groundwater, and as a result, the waste is impacting groundwater. So first, the Central Valley Water Board is tasked with determining which existing ponds have hydraulic continuity to groundwater. To do that, the Central Valley Water Board is to issue orders within 1 year of the State Water Board's adoption of the final dairy order to require dairies that have existing ponds that may have 5 feet or less vertical separation between the pond floor and the highest groundwater elevation to demonstrate, if they can, that their ponds do not have hydraulic continuity. Then, for existing ponds that have no hydraulic continuity to groundwater, the draft order recommends that those ponds meet an interim seepage rate of 0.9 millimeters per day. The dairy must also perform seepage rate tests or alternative test every 3 years to make sure the seepage rate is being met. Next, for ponds that do have hydraulic continuity to groundwater, or where dairies cannot demonstrate no hydraulic continuity with groundwater, these ponds are the highest concern, so the draft order recommends that they have the same requirements that apply to new and reconstructed existing ponds discussed below at number 4. The requirements must be implemented within 3 years of the Central Valley Water Board determining the pond is in hydraulic continuity to groundwater. Last, new ponds and reconstructed existing ponds. The draft order recommends that they must have either a double liner with a leachate collection system or an alternative single liner design subject to leak detection and VADOS zone monitoring requirements. The framework's third key area of focus is providing alternative drinking water supplies. As I've previously mentioned, the State Water Board is very concerned about the real and adverse impacts to people and communities who are reliant on drinking water that is contaminated by nitrates. With that recognition in mind, the regulatory framework requires dairies that cause or contribute to an exceedance of the drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter in groundwater for nitrates to promptly provide alternative water supplies to any residents relying on that groundwater. This requirement is precedential for other regions that have dairies that collect and land apply their waste. Lastly, for Central Valley dairies that are participating in a management zone consistent with the requirements of the CV Salts program, this requirement is satisfied because the CV Salts management zones are already required to provide alternative drinking water for affected residents. So this slide highlights the regulatory framework's key takeaways for how the Central Valley Water Board would implement the mandatory components. The specified implementation requirements that must be included in the Central Valley Water Board's revised general waste discharge requirements include the nitrogen discharge limit. Dairies must not cause or contribute to an exceedance of the drinking water standard for nitrates. The whole farm accounting method, and that's to be developed by the Central Valley Water Board. That would track nitrogen use across the entire farm. The final time schedule, which is the set deadline to be determined by the Central Valley Water Board for final compliance with the nitrogen discharge limit. Interim milestones of deadlines, deadlines along the way to meet final compliance, also to be determined by the Central Valley Water Board. And the provision of alternative drinking water supplies to affected residents. Next, the recommended implementation requirements for the Central Valley Water Board to consider including in the revised general WDRs include the groundwater loading limit and the multi-year final land application rates, both of which would be developed by the State Water Board. and the whole farm nitrogen balance as an interim milestone. And also, although not on this slide, the recommended requirements for the 3 categories of ponds that I mentioned earlier. This slide highlights the framework's requirements that are applicable in regions other than the Central Valley region. Importantly, they are only triggered for another region if it has dairies that land apply. Dairy is considered to land apply when it collects manure from the dairy and then applies it to land it owns or operates. So this would not include pasture-based dairy operations. The precedential components are the nitrogen discharge limit, the final land application rates, the time schedule to comply with those final rates, interim land application rates, the whole farm nitrogen accounting approach. However, here, without the need for the region to develop the approach, if it uses the one developed by the Central Valley Water Board. The irrigation and nitrogen plan reporting, management plan reporting requirements. And last, to provide alternative drinking water supplies to residences relying on domestic wells where the dairy is contributing to the exceedance of 10 milligrams per liter of nitrates in groundwater. In terms of the timeline, these regional water boards that have dairies that land apply must issue or update their dairy WDRs to include these components within 3 years of the Central Valley Water Board's adoption of the revised dairy general WDRs on remand. And then one final note is that to the extent the framework affords discretion to the Central Valley Water Board in determining the specific implementation requirements, the other regional water boards are afforded the same discretion, subject to the same obligation to evaluate our proposed requirements as the preferred options. Here's the anticipated timeline and public process for the dairy order, during which there are several opportunities for public input. We distributed the draft order on October 1st. Today is the virtual staff workshop, providing a chance to ask clarifying questions about the order. Written comments are encouraged to be submitted until December 6th, 2024 at noon. And then after reviewing the comments, we may make revisions to the draft order. And then in mid-2025, we expect to hold a state water board workshop where you will have the opportunity to provide oral comments directly to the board members. Finally, based on public feedback and potential further revisions to the draft dairy order, we'll aim for a state water board adoption meeting in late 2025 to mid-2026. I just want to emphasize that these are dates that are estimates at this point. For example, we may have one or more board workshop, depending on the comments we receive. As my final slide, this slide recaps that there are a number of actions required by the different water boards after the State Water Board adopts the final dairy order. The State Water Board will develop the groundwater loading limit and the final land application rate formula, consulting with academics and in coordination with the Central Valley Water Board and the dairy industry. It will submit the groundwater loading limit and the formula to a scientific peer review process. The Central Valley Water Board will develop the whole farm nitrogen accounting method also in consultation with experts, and will submit the method it develops to a scientific peer review process. The Central Valley Water Board will then develop the CEQA analysis for the revised dairy general WDRs. The Central Valley Water Board will also determine which existing ponds have hydraulic continuity to groundwater and not waste retention ponds, as the slide here misstates. And the Central Valley Water Board will adopt the revised general WDRs. And then within 3 years after that, the other regions for which the precedential elements of the dairy order apply will update their dairy WDRs. This concludes my presentation. Again, this slide shows where to email any questions that you have. It also has the website for the petition page that you may want to refer back to from time to time because we will be updating the petition page throughout the entire public process for the dairy order. We'll go ahead and take a short break before moving on to answering the questions that you have submitted to us. I'll keep this slide up for about a minute, and then I'll transfer over to the break slide. And then we'll resume with Mr. Wiles.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us for this long. We're now going to transition to the second part of the staff workshop, which is where I will be doing my best to answer the questions that have been emailed to the email address that you see on the screen. And we will keep that slide up so that if you do have questions, further questions as we go, you can submit them. As you might imagine, we're going to do some of this in live time, and I will be doing my best also to speak slowly for the interpreters. So again, please bear with us. And before I start, I do want to point out that we absolutely are soliciting written comments on the current version of the draft dairy order. And so if I do not address a question that you have emailed in, it might be because we viewed it as more of a comment or an opinion about the draft order. And so if we don't get to your question, or if you don't think that the question is adequately answered, please do reframe your question as a comment or either a recommendation for a clarification in the draft order or a request to change the draft order. Submit those in your written comments by December 6th at noon. And then we'll make sure that we take a close look at it then. And I do want to point out that just based on the questions we have received so far, I think it is fairly likely that we will go ahead and release a revised draft dairy order prior to scheduling a public workshop with the State Water Board members. So as Stacy said earlier, please do subscribe to future communications, and the instructions for doing that are on the website that you see on the screen in front of you. I'm going to be a little bit distracted because I will, as questions come in, I will be forwarding them to some of the other folks on the team who will be sending me some answers. I already have a number of questions and answers that I'm prepared to start with. I just did get a question that is not about the contents of the draft order. The question was, is it possible to get the slides from today's workshop? And I do know that several of you, I think, were probably seeing the slides in the Spanish language until you were able to correct that. The answer is that the entire workshop, including this portion of the workshop, is being recorded. And those, the recordings will be posted as soon as we have them available on this, the website that's listed in front of you. We're anticipating that those should be available for us to post by Monday. So yes, our understanding is that we will be able to post recordings of both the English and the Spanish version of this workshop then. So please do check back. And I'm being told that maybe you can't hear me. So let me see if I am having a technical problem. Or maybe somebody else in the English channel on the team can chime in and say whether you're having problems hearing me.
I can hear you.
All right, thank you. Okay, then I'm going to proceed then. Now, again, I'm going to be summarizing the questions that we've received that are asking for clarification about what's in the draft order, and then giving some answers to those. So the first question was asking if we can clarify what we mean by the precedential elements. And further, when we are talking about the precedential elements of the regulatory framework, are we referring to non-dairy facilities that import dairy manure? And the answer is that the draft order uses the term precedential to refer to requirements that would apply to dairies that land apply their own dairy waste on land that the dairy owns or operates in regions other than the Central Valley region. So that's the way we're talking when the draft order uses the phrase precedential, it's referring just to land application by dairies in other regions. It does not refer to any facilities that are not dairies. Another question that we got is similar, and that question is, will the precedential components of the regulatory framework apply in other regions, even if there is evidence that the dairy is not adversely impacting groundwater or surface water? And the answer is that as it's currently drafted, the draft dairy order does not include any exceptions from the precedential requirements. So if anybody thinks that there should be exceptions, please absolutely feel free to include those in your written comments. The next question was, is it the intent of the State Water Board or the Central Valley Water Board to incorporate facilities currently regulated under the Digester General Order into a single general order? And what about bovine facilities and other concentrated animal feeding operations? So as drafted, the answer is, as drafted, the regulatory framework would apply to all dairies, including those that are currently regulated under the Digester General Order, but it would not require that all dairies be regulated under a single general order. The draft order implies that it would apply only to milk cow dairies, but we would definitely welcome comments or recommendations on whether it should be limited to milk cow dairies or expanded to other dairies. The next question was, how does the draft order define a pasture-based dairy operation? And this is important because this also is a factor in determining whether the regulatory framework is precedential for regions other than the Central Valley region. And the answer is, the draft order does attempt to distinguish between dairies that have corrals on the one hand and dairies that are pasture-based on the other hand. But the draft order does not define the term pasture-based. We have received actually several questions, some a little bit more specific about what the draft order means by pasture-based, including questions about dairies that utilize pastures some of the time, but not all of the time. So I'll just say, I think it's clear that we need to be more precise when we're talking about the difference between corral-based dairy that is subject to the precedential requirements and a pasture-based dairy that is not. So we would definitely welcome any comments on how we should be more precise in terms of which dairies outside of Region 5, the Central Valley region, should be subject to the precedential requirements. The next question is about the statement in the draft order that any new dairies should be designed to immediately comply with the final land application rates. And the question asks for some clarity about whether this applies to existing unregulated dairies, expansions of existing dairies, consolidations of 2 or more existing dairies, or repopulation of existing regulated dairies that do not currently house cows, but for which regulatory coverage has not yet been terminated. And the answer is that the draft order on page 58 refers to new dairies that commence operations after the Central Valley Water Board adopts its final numeric dairy waste land application rates. So that means that existing unregulated dairies would not be included in those that are required to immediately comply with the final land application rates. The draft order does not speak directly to the other questions regarding expansions or consolidations or repopulations in this context, so we would welcome your comments. The next question was, how does the draft order define the bottom of the pond for the purposes of the waste retention pond components? And the answer is that as currently written, the draft order does not include a definition. So again, we would welcome any recommendations about how we should define the bottom of a pond. The next question was asking about dairies that cannot feasibly perform seepage rate tests on page 70 of the draft order, and are they required to implement the default pond construction standards? The answer is that the draft order does not require these dairies to automatically implement the default pond construction standard. The draft order currently recommends that the Central Valley Water Board consider allowing dairies that cannot feasibly perform the seepage rate test to meet an alternative method of showing that the pond is complying with the interim seepage rate requirements. That alternative method would be developed by the Central Valley Dairy Monitoring Program, subject to approval by the Central Valley Water Board. The next question was, do the new regulatory framework's waste retention pond components apply to solids settling ponds? And the answer is that as drafted, the order does not currently address solids settling ponds. So we would welcome input and comments on whether it should, and if so, how it should. The next question: will the State Water Board provide additional funding for developing software that dischargers can use to prepare and submit annual reports? And the answer is, again, the draft order does not address this issue, so please do feel free to add this to your comments. The next question was, is the groundwater loading limit in the draft order intended to be consistent or compatible with the CV salts management zone implementation plans in the Central Valley? And the answer is the draft order does not attempt to tie the groundwater loading limit concept to the management zone implementation plans. But if you think that they should be, then please do submit comments to that extent. And then the next question was for the Central Valley CV salts priority 1 and priority 2 areas. The dairies that are participating in management zone implementation programs are they are providing replacement drinking water, but outside of the priority 1 and 2 areas, it's more complicated. I think that was the background for the question, which is, what is the standard for attributing nitrate contamination in a domestic well to a dairy? And the answer is to that question is that the draft order does not address this. It is something I think by history and experience we know is sometimes a difficult task. So in previous orders, we have not been as specific as to explain how that's done. But if you think that there is some helpful clarification that we could provide, please do include that in your comments. The next question was regarding the anti-degradation section. What specifically does the board mean when it says that the Central Valley Water Board must address any additional economic and social costs associated with the discharges of dairy waste? And the answer is that the draft order does not specify each of the costs that the Central Valley would need to consider. So essentially, the draft order leaves this level of detail to the Central Valley Water Board to determine when it is reissuing its waste discharge requirements, based in part on the comments that it receives at that time. But if anybody has additional specificity that they think would be helpful for the State Water Board to add to the draft order, please include those in your comments. The next question is, will there be any specific guidelines issued by the State Water Board to staff on how to conduct technical coordination with the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program? The answer is that I think that we'll consider that when we get closer to the point where that's actually part of the order that the board will be considering for adoption. The next question is asking about when will the enforceable interim numeric land application rates or other milestones and corresponding deadlines be adopted? And will this take place after the State Water Board and the Regional Board determine the final land application rate formulas? And I actually don't have a direct answer. I believe the answer is yes, but it will be definitely part of the revised waste discharge requirements adopted by the Central Valley Board. The next question was referring to the scientific peer review that the draft order identifies will be used for a couple of the conceptual components. And it's asking, what does the peer review process specifically entail? And the peer review process is something that all of the Cal EPA agencies have been using now for close to 30 years. We have a contract with the University of California, Berkeley. We use it primarily when we are adopting regulations or water quality control plans and policies. But the draft order does say that and directs that we will use it for some of the conceptual components of the regulatory framework. And generally what it involves is an arm's length independent review by experts that are selected by the University of California, Berkeley, These are academic experts that come from anywhere in the United States and occasionally even international experts, where they would review the work that is proposed by the staff of the Water Board, and then provide their peer review comments as to the scientific validity of what the staff is proposing. The next question is regarding the direction in the draft dairy order to the Central Valley Water Board to require dairies to begin reporting data available reporting available data necessary to evaluate whole farm nitrogen balance. I believe that's actually whole farm nitrogen accounting. The question is, will this directive come with specifications as to what data must be collected and how must it be managed and reported? And the answer is yes, our expectation is that the Central Valley Water Board will be very specific about what the data is that needs to be collected and reported. But we are leaving those details to the Central Valley Water Board. If you have recommendations for more specificity in the draft dairy order, please do submit those as part of your written comments. The next question is, will this general order now include all dairies that have expanded in the Central Valley region since 2013? The answer is yes. The draft dairy order does direct the Central Valley Water Board to issue waste discharge requirements that would apply to all dairies in the Central Valley region. The next related question is there a clear path for dairies to be able to expand their herd size once the new revised order is adopted? The expectation of the State Board is that when the Central Valley Water Board issues its waste discharge requirements that apply to all dairies, that the waste discharge requirements will address future expansions. And so I think we expect that the answer to that will be yes, but it will be in the revised waste discharge requirements issued by the Central Valley Water Board. The next question is, will a synthetic liner be required for all existing waste ponds? And the answer is that at least in the interim, the draft dairy order differentiates between existing waste ponds that are in hydraulic continuity with groundwater and those that are not, in terms of what has to happen to the existing waste ponds. And so, at least again, in the interim, existing waste retention ponds that are not in hydraulic continuity and are demonstrated to not be in hydraulic continuity with groundwater would not be required to install a synthetic liner as of now. That's based on what the current draft dairy order says. And I think we've received a couple more questions while I've been talking. So what we'll do right now is take a quick break so that I can read through those questions and figure out which ones I can answer. And then we'll come back and I'll answer those questions. And then that will bring us to the close of the workshop. I estimate we'll be back in something in the order of 5 minutes. That's my hope, having not read the questions yet. So thanks. We'll take a quick break now. I'll read the questions that have come in most recently, and then we'll be back and I'll answer those questions. So please stand by for approximately 5 minutes. Thanks. All right, everybody. Sorry, we got a few more emailed questions than we were expecting, but we're back now. And I am going to say at this point that I don't think we'll have the ability to answer any more questions. By all means, do take advantage of the written comment opportunity for any questions that you have that we didn't get to today. You can always submit those as written comments asking for clarification, or in most cases, I think the questions really are indicating that you have a preference for the draft dairy order, perhaps to either be more precise about something or to say something different. So again, please do submit those written comments. And I also got a query about whether, in addition to the posting the recordings of today's workshop, whether we can also post just the slides that we're using in English and Spanish. And yes, we will go ahead and do that. I will say that we did identify, or Stacy did identify, one misstatement about whether the hydraulic continuity between the waste retention pond and groundwater. It was misstated as hydraulic continuity between the waste retention pond and the waste retention pond. So we'll fix that slide, and then we'll post the slides on the same web page that's up on the screen right now. All right, so let's get into it. These questions came in while I was speaking, answering the other questions, so I've given them a really quick look. I apologize if I misstate any of the questions, but here goes. The first question is, the State Board draft order directs the Central Valley Regional Board to develop a compliance timeline that is as short as practicable and is aligned with the Central Valley Salts program, which is 35 years at the outside. But the management zone implementation plans provide very little justification for this time schedule. So how will the State Water Board ensure that the timelines established by the regional board will be as short as practicable? And the answer to this question, and some other questions that we received about how will the State Water Board essentially monitor what the Central Valley Water Board is doing when it issues its revised waste discharge requirements, and what will the other regional boards be doing. This all assumes that the State Water Board adopts the dairy order at some point in the future with similar or the same directions. And the answer is that the State Water Board has a sort of a general ability to provide oversight. That ability comes in a couple of different ways. Sometimes we will direct the regional boards to provide annual or biannual updates to the State Water Board, just to keep the State Water Board informed about the regional board's progress. The State Water Board can, as we are doing right here, also exercise its ability to review the future actions to implement the dairy order in a petition process, either because it was filed by somebody as a petition, or even if we do not receive a petition, the State Water Board, as Stacy indicated early on in her presentation, the State Water Board can at any time on its own decide to review the regional board's decisions or its actions. The next question is, what is the timeline for compliance for existing dairies that are not in the Central Valley region? And the answer is that as it's currently written, the draft order specifies that those regional water boards must develop a final time schedule, but it does not specify the outer limit like it does for the Central Valley Water Board of no more than 35 years. So If you have comments on that, please do include those in your written comment letter. The next question is, will the State Water Board consider providing guidance to the regional boards about what practices, we often refer to these as management practices, dairies should be using to meet their final numeric land application limits? And the draft order doesn't discuss this. So if it were adopted as it's currently written, that would be left up to the regional water boards. But I will say that the draft dairy order does anticipate that the whole farm nitrogen accounting approach would be used to ensure that the final numeric land application limits are being complied with once they take effect. So anything beyond that, at least at this point, would be up to the regional water board. The next question, has the state board identified unintended consequences of developing a manure market? And the answer is that the draft order does direct the regional water board, the Central Valley Water Board, to conduct a California Environmental Quality Act analysis as part of its development of the revised waste discharge requirements. And so that would be an appropriate place to raise concerns about environmental impacts of a manure market. But if you have specific comments on that issue and you'd like to submit those, please do include those now with the written comments to the State Water Board. The next question is also back to the discussion in the draft dairy order about providing guidance to the water boards, the regional boards, for how they should consider the health and environmental costs to communities when the Central Valley Board revises the dairy order. Excuse me, revises the waste discharge requirements. And the draft order does include some guidance about considerations for the regional board and some examples of those considerations on page 42 and also footnote 142 on page 43. But if you have additional recommendations, please include those in your written comments. The next question is about timeline, and it's, when will the state board establish the final numeric land application rate formulas and the final nitrogen discharge limit? So the final nitrogen discharge limit, that's maybe a term of art that's already specified in the draft order. And regarding the numeric land application rate formulas, if the State Water Board adopts the order as it's currently drafted regarding the final numeric land application rate formulas, then we will get working on it promptly as soon as the State Water Board acts. The next question is, do the final numeric land application rates and the final nitrogen discharge limit include nitrogen discharged from corrals? And the answer is, again, as drafted, the nitrogen discharge limit does apply to all waste discharges from all aspects of a dairy that can affect groundwater. But as drafted, the land application rates would apply only to the dairy waste that is applied to the dairy's cropland. The next question is, what is the deadline that will apply to the development of the alternative water supply programs? And how will the state board ensure that this component is implemented in the other regions? And the answer is that as written, the draft dairy order just directs the regional boards to implement alternative water supply programs promptly for dairies that are contributing to exceedances of the nitrate drinking water standard. It's no more specific than that. So if you have comments on that, please do submit them. And in terms of how will the State Water Board ensure that the regional boards are following this direction, it's what I mentioned before in terms of having the regional boards potentially give progress reports to the state board periodically, or the state board reviewing in the same sort of petition context that we're reviewing the existing dairy waste discharge requirements. The next question is, the draft order directs the Central Valley Board to act with all due haste to develop certain requirements directed in the order. Can the State Water Board please clarify the timeline envisioned by the term all due haste, or the terms as soon as practicable or as soon as possible, where those appear in the draft order? And so the draft order as it's currently written does not provide any more detail. So this would be another area where if you think more detail and you have proposed detail that you'd like the State Water Board to consider, please do include that in your written comments. The next, and I think this is actually the final set of questions that I'll be going through. So some of these were submitted during the presentation, and I've already answered similar questions submitted by other people. So let me go through all the ones that I haven't already answered. The first question is that the groundwater loading limits will be, sorry, the draft order states that the groundwater loading limits will be averaged across an appropriate area and time scale. What is meant by appropriate? And the answer is the draft order does not define what we mean by appropriate, but we would definitely welcome input in the comment letters about what the commenters believe would be appropriate. The next question is that the draft order has language regarding traditional growers that are not affiliated with the dairy in terms of distinguishing between coverage under the dairy waste discharge requirements on the one hand, and under the other waste discharge requirements that apply to our irrigated lands regulatory program, which is for traditional growers. The question is, does the draft dairy order include include discharges or land application discharges to land that is not owned by the dairy, but is operated by the dairy, or operated by a grower who is affiliated with the dairy? And can the state board clarify this? The answer is the draft order doesn't actually get into that level of detail about affiliated growers. So definitely would welcome your input on that. The next question asks for some clarity about what we mean by new expansions. And does this include expansions beyond the existing herd size? Or is this using the same definition of expanded, which is a 15% increase of the mature cow herd that is used in the Central Valley Water Board's 2013 order? The answer is the draft order doesn't specify. So please do submit that as a comment, because that would be useful for us to be more clear about what we mean by expanded. The next question is, how does the whole farm balance concept in the draft order differ from the proposal contained in the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program's Summary Representative Monitoring Report, if at all? And the answer is that we are not, the draft order would require some further development of that balance approach if it is used by if the Central Valley Water Board chooses to use it. And the draft order definitely requires further development of a related concept that we do require to be used, which is the whole farm accounting approach. And so, yes, there would be additional work to flesh both of those out if the Central Valley Water Board chooses to use the whole farm balance concept as an interim requirement. And then the last question says that regarding the anti-degradation policy, the draft order concludes that the regional boards may allow degradation of high-quality waters to a level less than water quality objectives if there is a time schedule and the degradation is temporary. Does the draft order require that the regional board must find that the water quality degradation is temporary? And if so, how do staff interpret this term? And so the draft order does not include any specific requirements regarding findings. So if you think that that would be useful, and it also doesn't include anything specific about how staff would interpret the term temporary. So if you have any comments on that issue, please do submit those in your comment letter. And I believe that that brings us to the, it brings us to the end of the comments that were submitted, excuse me, the questions that were submitted to the email address. So I want to just take a moment to thank all of you for persevering with us through the workshop. One more time, if we didn't answer a question that you submitted, please do include it in the written comments that you submit by December 6th. You may want to reframe your question more as a comment or a request for clarification or a request for a change to the draft order, if that's what it really is getting at. But I'm going to, at this point, sign off. Thank you all very much for staying with us. We had something in the order of over 100 participants during the course of the workshop. So we're grateful that you all took the time to join us. And again, we will be posting the recordings and the PowerPoints on the website. So please do check back. And if we have any major updates to the website, we will also be sending out a email using our email subscription. So if you aren't already subscribed to the email subscriptions, please do go to the website on your screen and make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on any important information. And with that, thanks to the team for the support and to our interpreters for doing their excellent work. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thank you.